makes an astonishing claim that through the cross, Jesus defeated death forever, and that those who follow him will live forever. But what does that mean for our lives today? Alistair Begg unpacks the answer to that question on Truth for Life as he continues in our study of 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Paul is underscoring the fact that if we say there is no resurrection, then there are a number of implications to that. And three he addresses in these verses. And I would like you to notice them with me in turn. Number one, if there is no resurrection, he says in verse 29, what will those do who are baptized for the dead? So let me summarize the question. If there is no resurrection of the dead, why then this strange practice? Secondly, if there is no resurrection, why should I suffer and live with this severe persecution? Phillips paraphrases it, why should I live a life of such hourly danger? Back in verse 19, he's already said, if only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are to be pitied more than all men. And so it follows, obviously, without the resurrection of Jesus Christ, to live a life of suffering and of heartache and of brutality is nothing more than masochism. Paul says, if you take the resurrection away from me, why am I going through this? Good question. What is the point of living with present danger if there is no future delight? What is the point of facing the self-denying ministry of the gospel if there is no living forever? The answer is, it is a futility minus the resurrection. Now, Paul is referring to specific instances here. Whether the expression of wild beasts is literal or metaphorical, we'll find out in heaven. It may well be that he was put in the arena with wild beasts, but it is unlikely because he was a Roman citizen and they were not subjected to that. However, those of you who are thinking, no, that he got his face slapped and got imprisoned as a Roman citizen when he shouldn't. So there are anomalies, and it could have been. The likelihood is, however, that people had abused and disabused them. But he says this was purposeful. It happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God. What kind of God is he? Well, he is a God who raises the dead. You see, he can't speak of God without the resurrection. He can't speak of Christ without this wonderful truth. Because remember, he thought that Jesus was dead. He thought that Jesus was a mythology. He thought that Christianity was bogus. And then all of a sudden on the Damascus Road, Jesus is there and says, hey, Paul. Actually, hey, Saul. Now notice this, verse 10. Here is a summary, a wonderful, succinct summary of Christian experience. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril. What is that? The wrath and condemnation of God, eternal hell. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril. Anything else? Yeah. And he will deliver us. This continuing work of the Spirit of God, an evidence of the fact, says Paul, that Jesus is alive. If you turn forward a couple more chapters into chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians, you have this wonderful summary of Paul's experience, a wonderful summary of his difficult experiences. And you'll find it in verse 8 of 2 Corinthians 4, and I want to quote it from Phillips' paraphrase. He says, we are handicapped on all sides, but we are never frustrated. We are puzzled, but we're never in despair. We are persecuted, but we never have to stand it alone. We may be knocked down, but we're never knocked out. Every day we experience something of the death of Jesus so that we may also know the power of Jesus in these bodies of ours. The principle is an obvious and clear one. You want to be a powerful Christian? You want to know, if you like, Pentecostal power in your life? There is no Pentecostal power without crucifixion pain. It is in dying that I live. It is in weakness that I am strong. It is in emptiness that I am full. It is in self-forgetfulness that I become useful. It takes a long time for many of us to learn this lesson. If there's no resurrection of the dead, what, says Paul, is the point of us enduring this great suffering? Now, you see, that's the question that has been faced by believers throughout the world. And one of the difficulties, I think, not that we would wish this on ourselves in any way, but one of the difficulties in living in the freedoms of this American culture is that we have nothing in our background that speaks to this issue. We live in a post-Reformation society. We don't know what it was like before that. We live in a society that has never undergone religious persecution, so we don't fully understand that. And God has preserved us, but may not always. 17th century Scotland was a time of great pain and brutality in relationship to religious things. Those who were the men and women of the covenant who held true to the foundations of the faith and to the truth of the resurrection of Jesus and to the establishing of what it means to be genuinely converted were harried from pillar to post by establishment religion. And it was during that period of the 17th century that these groups of Scots would meet in little conventicles. They could not build buildings. They could not meet in homes. They could not identify the fact that they were meeting for the worship of Christ. And so they would be out in the moorlands and on the heathers and on the hills, hiding and conducting their worship services. And with great frequency, the troops would come and pillage them, invade them, and brutalize them for one reason only: because they stood for the cause of the gospel, because they would not compromise, because they would not link hands with everyone and anyone who had any idea just about God or about Jesus and said, oh, well, as long as they believe something, that's fine with us. No, they said, there will never be a future of the church in Scotland unless we are prepared to die for the issues of the gospel. There was no greater hero of the Scottish Covenanting period than a young man by the name of Richard Cameron, who died at the age of 32. He didn't die, he was murdered by the troops. And when they invaded the worship service, they dragged him apart and they killed him. They cut off his head and they cut off his hands. And they carried both his head and his hands on the end of swords back into the capital of the country. And their plan was to take the head and the hands and impale them on the railings down in the Netherbow, which some of you have seen, by John Knox's house. And as they made their way to that eventuality, one of the soldiers said, listen, isn't Cameron's dad in the Tolbooth jail? Oh yes, says someone, he is. Then says the soldier, why don't we take this over there and show him? And so they walked into his cell with 2 daggers and a sword, bearing the elements of Richard Cameron's shattered frame. And they said to him, sir, do you know these? And his reply is recorded. And he took them upon his knee and bent over them and kissed them and said, I know them, I know them. They are my sons, my dear sons. And then weeping and yet praising, he went on, it is the Lord. Good is the will of the Lord, who cannot wrong me nor mine, but has made goodness and mercy to follow us all the days of our lives. Now I ask you, is the man crazy? Yes, if there is no resurrection. But with the resurrection, he knew that as he took that fashioned head within his hands, his boy was already in the presence of the King for whom he died, translated, glorified, and in the presence of Jesus. If there's no resurrection, why this strange practice? If there's no resurrection, why this severe persecution to be put up with? And thirdly, if there is no resurrection, why not simply party? Isn't that it there in verse 32? Towards the end, he says, if the dead are not raised, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The formulae of the Epicureans. Let's be party animals in Cleveland. Let's buy the baggage. He who dies with the most toys wins. Let's say the silly stuff that nobody really believes. Well, you only go around once. And deep inside that person's heart, when they drive alone in their car and think that out, they have the sneaking suspicion which God put there that yes, there will only be one passage through this earthly pilgrimage, but that is not the end. There is a yet. There is a not yet. But, says Paul, once remove the resurrection, and the hedonist's dream is understandable. Get all you can, with anyone you can, anytime you can, anywhere you want. Grab it all. Well, says Paul, if there's no resurrection, why don't we just buy into that one? And out from the pages of Scripture come his words in Galatians 6, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps exactly what he sows. You see, and that's what our contemporary world does not want to hear. They want a spirituality with no rules. They want peace with no sacrifice. They want eternity with no self-denial. They don't want revival. They don't want God to come. They just want to make it comfortable again so that sin won't have all this ugliness attached to it. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. What a man sows, that he shall also reap. Now it is with that word of warning that he concludes in verses 33 and 34. Look, he says, don't be misled. Don't be misled. He gives us a proverb to apply. Look at it. Bad company corrupts good character. You become like the people with whom you spend time. You become like the ideas with whom you spend time. You become like the music to which you listen. If you listen to emptiness and despair, you will become an empty and despairing person. If you fill your mind only with acquisition and with greed, you will become a greedy person. If you hang around with critical people, you will become a critical person. And therefore the presence that we keep, he says, will have an impact on our lives. Bad company corrupts good character. If you hang around with these people who say there is no resurrection of the dead, although you think there is, you'll start to believe just as they do. And when you start to believe as they do, then you will start to behave as they behave. And he said, I want you to understand it. Bad company corrupts good character. Incidentally, and in passing, there is a word here, I believe, that had never struck me in studying this passage before, but there is a word here for these solid Christians who determine that they're going to stay in liberal churches where the minister does not believe the Bible and does not teach the Bible, and they're staying there, they say, because they're going to turn it around. I admire their zeal. I call in question their strategy. Why? Because of this statement. Bad company corrupts good character. And you cannot sit and listen to nonsense week after week after week without imbibing a significant amount of that nonsense. It is the responsibility of every straight-shooting Christian to sit consistently under the effective, useful, clarifying, relevant preaching of the Word of God. Proverb to apply. A plea to heed. Verse 34, come back to your senses, waken up. Get out of your drunken stupor is the literal translation. Don't dabble with sinful doubts, he says. Doctrine leads to conduct. Unsound doctrine leads to sinful behavior. That's why we're teaching the Bible. That's why we're trying to teach biblical doctrine. You say, well, I want to get on to practical things. Listen, this is the most practical stuff there is. The way you think affects what you do. So you've got to learn to think. If you learn how to think, you'll learn how to live. You can live without thinking. That's called thoughtlessness. Leads you into craziness. People say, well, I think this and I think that, and I just cut it out. Listen. Stop sinning as a result of being senseless in your behavior. Whenever you find yourself adjusting your view of the Bible or of the character of God to accommodate yourself. So it goes something like this: I don't like to think of God in this way anymore. Or, I now like to think of God more like this. Whenever you find yourself adjusting your view of the Bible and the character of God in that way, let me tell you something. You have either just engaged in sin or you're planning on it. You are either covering your trails because you've just blotted your copybook, or you're setting up your stall for something you're planning on doing this week. Come to your senses is the plea. And finally, there's a problem to be fixed, which is at the heart of the whole thing. He says there are some who are ignorant of God. This is the fundamental error in it all. Oh, they talk a good talk, but they lack a real and personal knowledge of God. And he says, you've been listening to them. They have plenty to say, but they have no knowledge of God. And he says, I'm so concerned for you. He says, I would even shame you. I would even shame you in order to get you to walk away from such confused behavior. Well, our time is gone, and that's the little paragraph essentially. It's a tough little paragraph, and sorry if it seems tough. It's fairly obscure, it's relatively difficult, but it points to the importance of at least these two things. Number one, there is a direct relationship between what I believe about the future and how I behave in the present. There is a direct relationship between what I believe about the future and how I behave in the present. When I was a student, both at school and in the early part of my college days in Nottingham and then in London, I remember those fiendish pimples on your face. Zits, you call them. It's got a pithy relevance to it, zits. Most of the English-speaking world calls them pimples. In Scotland, they call them plooks, which I think pretty well captures it. It's got a sort of, what's that big plook in your chin? Okay? Now, there was one thing that was guaranteed to galvanize me into scrupulous action in relationship to these aforementioned pimples, zits, plooks. And that was the prospect of the arrival of Susan Jones from the States to visit me. The more imminent the thought of her appearing, the more all-consuming was the concern with these things. And I would look and press and look and rub and scrape into her because she's coming soon, and I want to be found without spot and without blemish. Does that sound kind of biblical? You've got it. He's coming soon. And because I know about the future, it affects me in the present. And a zeal for the return of Jesus is seen when a boy or a girl begins to clean up their act and begins to tell others about this Jesus. That's how I know you're in love with the return of Christ. The real issue, a church on fire with a prospect of the return of Jesus, they're cleaning up and they're getting out. There is a direct relationship between what I believe about the future and how I live in the present. And the final point of application is this, that we don't know what our tomorrows hold. One visit to the Cleveland Clinic, and that funny silence when the radiographer puts the thing up on the screen, and your life and mine will be changed in an instant. Tomorrow, and in all of our tomorrows, there is inevitable sadness, pain, loss, fear, bereavement, disappointment. So how in the world can anyone hope to cope without the resurrection? They can't. That is why men are described by Paul in Ephesians as being without God, and without hope in the world. But the Christian's behavior will allow the Christian to speak concerning their belief. Hey, what's the problem with you that you're not coming to the strip joint with us? You some kind of weirdo? No, I'm not coming. Why? Jesus is coming. He's coming back. Oh, you're a nut. Come on, guys, let's get out of here. Leave him. 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Ring, 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 ring. Hey, you know a couple of months ago when you didn't come to the strip joint with us and I said I thought you were a weirdo? Hey, my wife just had a baby daughter. You know what? I'm ashamed of the fact that I go those places. You know what? You're the only guy I know that's got the guts not to go. Can I come over to your office so that you can tell me why you don't? True story. One of you told me it yesterday. Our belief about the future affects our behavior in the presence. And in all of our tomorrows, there's only one answer. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Can you?
You're listening to Alistair Begg on Truth for Life and a message titled, If There Is No Resurrection. In the event that you joined us late, or if you'd like to catch up on previous messages in this series, you'll find them online at truthforlife.org. Can you face each day with the confidence that Jesus holds your future? If you're not sure, let me encourage you to visit us online at truthforlife.org/thestory. You'll find a short video that explains what it means for you to give your life to Jesus. It also links you to other resources. All of Truth for Life's online resources are available free of charge because of the generosity of listeners like you, people who commit to regular monthly giving. If you're part of the current Truth Partner team, I want to extend our sincere thanks to you. If you've not yet taken that step, we want to invite you to become a Truth Partner today. Your generosity opens the way for men and women all around the world to have access to clear, relevant Bible teaching without cost being a barrier. And as a way of saying thanks for your partnership, we select 2 resources each month that you're welcome to request at no additional cost. Currently, we're featuring a substantial devotional that's all about the Passion Week. The book is titled The Final Days of Jesus, and it traces Jesus' steps from the triumphal entry on Palm Sunday to the Last Supper, to the Garden of Gethsemane, and to the cross. Request your copy of The Final Days of Jesus when you become a Truth Partner today, or when you make a one-time donation by calling 888-588-7884. That's 888-588-7884. Or request the book online at truthforlife.org/donate. If you'd prefer, you can mail your donation along with your request for the book to Truth for Life at P.O. Box 39, 8000, Cleveland, Ohio, 44139. I'm Bob Lepine, hoping you'll join us Tuesday. Alistair will continue our study of the resurrection, offering us hope even in the midst of tragedy. The Bible teaching of Alistair Begg is furnished by Truth for Life, where the learning is for living.